You're at a New Year's Eve party, surrounded by fireworks, joyful screams, and effusive hugs. Everyone seems radiant, as if something magical is really going to happen at midnight. But you look around and feel a strange emptiness in your chest, a profound disconnection you can't explain. While everyone celebrates, you're just surviving another passage of time, faking a happiness you don't feel. If you've ever lived this moment of loneliness amid the crowd, of estrangement before collective euphoria, then you know one of the rawest faces of the human condition that Albert Camus dedicated his life to understanding. Today, we're going to explore why some of us experience this existential dysrhythmia, and how this can be, paradoxically, the beginning of a more authentic life. There's a subtle cruelty in collective celebrations that we rarely admit out loud. When the calendar marks special dates, when social media fills with perfect smiles and declarations of gratitude, when everyone seems to have discovered the secret of happiness, those who can't feel this euphoria find themselves confronted with a devastating sensation of inadequacy. It's as if there were a manual for living that was distributed to everyone except you. Albert Camus deeply understood this experience of being out of sync with the world. He knew there are moments in life where we find ourselves as spectators of our own existence, watching from outside, while others seem to dance to music we can't hear. This feeling isn't a sign of depression or pathological pessimism. It's actually an awakening to what Camus called the absurd, the clear perception that there exists an unbridgeable chasm between our human need for meaning and the impenetrable silence of the universe. When you feel this disconnection during moments that should be happy, you're experiencing a form of lucidity that most people avoid at all costs. You're seeing through the social conventions that tell us when we should be happy, when we should celebrate, when we should feel grateful. But Camus teaches us that this lucidity, however painful, is the first step toward an authentic life. Because when we stop pretending to feel what we should feel, when we stop forcing ourselves to fit into prefabricated emotional molds, we open space to discover what truly resonates in our hearts. It's not that you're incapable of happiness, or that you're condemned to eternal melancholy. It's that you've developed an acute sensitivity to artificiality, an unconscious resistance to emotions manufactured to order for collective consumption. Think about those Sunday mornings when everyone seems to be enjoying their free time, posting photos of perfect brunches and family outings while you feel an inexplicable weight in your chest. Or those extended holidays that should be relaxing, but that leave you restless and melancholic, as if something important were slipping through your fingers. Camus would recognize in these experiences the symptoms of a mind that refuses to accept easy answers to complex questions. You can't celebrate automatically, because your consciousness demands something deeper than empty rituals. You can't fake happiness because your soul knows the difference between genuine joy and social performance. This is a form of existential integrity that should be celebrated, not fought against. Society constantly sells us the idea that we should always be progressing toward greater happiness, always seeking the next milestone of success, always working to be the best version of ourselves. But Camus suggests something radically different. He proposes that we recognize the fundamental futility of this endless search, and in doing so, find a form of freedom that transcends the constant need for personal optimization. When you realize you don't need to always be happy, that you don't need to celebrate just because others are celebrating, that you don't need to feel forced gratitude for a life that sometimes seems more burden than gift, you free yourself from the tyranny of others' expectations. You can simply exist, without justifications, without excuses, without the constant need to prove that you're adequately enjoying life. There's a strange beauty in this acceptance. When you stop fighting against your own nature, when you stop forcing yourself to feel emotions that don't come naturally, you discover that a different kind of peace is available. It's not the peace of ignorance or denial, but the peace of someone who has made peace with the complexity of human existence. You can be at a party and honestly recognize that you're not having fun, without feeling that this is a character flaw. You can go through difficult periods without the pressure to immediately transform them into personal growth lessons. You can simply be human, with all the contradictions and ambiguities that implies. Camus spoke about revolt as an authentic response to the absurd of existence. But this revolt isn't violent or destructive. It's the silent revolt of someone who refuses to accept simplistic explanations for complex experiences. It's the revolt of someone who insists on honoring their own perceptions, even when they don't align with what's socially expected. When you feel you're just surviving while others celebrate, you're practicing a form of existential revolt. You're saying no to the pressure to feel what you should feel, no to the obligation to be happy on demand, no to the idea that your internal experience must always correspond to external circumstances. This revolt doesn't mean you're condemned to isolation or bitterness. On the contrary, it can be the path to more authentic connections with other human beings. Because when you stop pretending, when you allow your real vulnerability to appear, you create space for others to do the same. You discover that you're not alone in this experience of being out of sync with the world. There are other people who also feel this strange melancholy during moments that should be joyful, who also struggle with the constant pressure to optimize their life experience, who also question whether there's something wrong with them for not being able to easily access the happiness that seems so available to everyone else. It's interesting how our culture treats emotional pain as a problem to be solved immediately. If you're not happy, you should take medicine, do therapy, practice gratitude, meditate, exercise, read self-help books, anything to quickly return to the normal state of satisfaction with life. But Camus suggests that maybe this pain isn't a bug in the system, but a feature. Maybe the capacity to feel the weight of existence, to perceive the fragility and transience of all things, to experience that inexplicable nostalgia that sometimes invades us, is actually a sign that we're truly alive, truly present, truly engaged with reality in all its contradictory complexity. When you're in a social situation and feel that familiar sensation of being on the outside, of observing everything through invisible glass, try to see this not as a defect, but as a particular way of being in the world. You're no less capable of connection or joy than others. You simply process human experience in a slower, more reflective, more careful way. You can't easily accept ready-made narratives about what should make you happy, because your consciousness demands something more substantial. This isn't a curse, it's a form of existential integrity. There's a profound difference between being depressed and simply being awake to the reality of the human condition. Depression closes us off from the world, makes us feel that nothing matters and that we'll never truly connect with other people or experiences. But what Camus describes is something different. It's the capacity to see clearly both the beauty and futility of existence, to simultaneously feel the weight and lightness of being alive. It's being able to be sad without despairing, to question the meaning of everything without surrendering to nihilism, to recognize the fundamental loneliness of human experience without completely isolating ourselves from others. Now I want to ask you a direct question. Have you ever felt this disconnection during moments that should be happy? Have you caught yourself faking a joy you didn't genuinely feel? If the answer is yes, leave in the comments simply, "I feel this too." Because it's important that you know you're not alone in this experience. Your response down here can help other people realize that this feeling of being out of sync isn't a personal failure, but a real and valid part of human experience that deserves to be recognized and understood, not fought or denied. Camus invites us to imagine Sisyphus happy, pushing his rock up the mountain eternally, knowing it will always roll back down. This image might seem depressing at first glance, but it's actually profoundly liberating. Sisyphus is happy not because he found a hidden meaning in his repetitive task, but because he stopped looking for that meaning. He accepts the absurd nature of his situation and finds, in that very acceptance, a form of dignity and even joy. When you can stop torturing yourself for not feeling what you should feel, when you can accept that sometimes you simply survive instead of celebrate, you find a peace similar to Sisyphus's. You free yourself from the constant need to justify or optimize your internal experience. This liberation doesn't mean passive resignation or abandonment of all hope for genuine joy. On the contrary, when you stop pursuing happiness as a mandatory goal, you create space for moments of real joy to appear naturally. You can feel pleasure in a deep conversation with a friend, in a solitary walk, in a book that resonates with your internal reflections, in an unexpected moment of beauty that touches you without warning. These moments become more precious precisely because you weren't desperately looking for them, because you weren't trying to manufacture or force them to exist. Human solidarity, for Camus, is born precisely from the shared recognition of our absurd condition. When we realize that we're all in the same fundamental situation, thrown into a universe that offers no definitive answers to our deepest questions, we can connect in a more honest and compassionate way. You don't need to pretend you have everything figured out to deserve companionship. You don't need to always be positive to be worthy of love. Your vulnerability, your confusion, your occasional inability to celebrate life with enthusiasm, all of this are valid parts of who you are, and other people can relate to these parts of you in a very real and transformative way. Think about how different it would be if our culture valued emotional honesty as much as it values positivity. If it were normal to admit you're going through a difficult period without immediately offering solutions or advice. If it were acceptable to say you're not managing to feel grateful for your life at the moment without being bombarded with reminders of how you should feel lucky. If it were common to recognize that there are phases of life where simply surviving is already a significant achievement, where keeping yourself basically functioning is already enough, where not having completely fallen apart is already cause for silent pride. Camus believed we can create meaning through our actions, even while recognizing that this meaning isn't guaranteed by the universe. When you choose to keep living despite the absence of definitive answers, when you treat other people with kindness, even knowing we're all fundamentally alone, when you create something beautiful or meaningful, knowing everything is temporary, you're practicing what he called creative revolt. You're affirming the value of human life, not because it has a guaranteed transcendent purpose, but simply because you choose to affirm it. This choice can be made in the smallest daily gestures. When you wake up on a difficult morning and decide to prepare coffee with care, you're practicing creative revolt. When you truly listen to a friend who is suffering without immediately trying to solve their problems, you're practicing existential solidarity. When you allow a tear to roll down your face without judging yourself for being sad, you're practicing radical acceptance of your own humanity. These might seem like small actions, but for Camus, they represent everything we can do in the face of existence's absurdity. Keep choosing life moment after moment, without guarantees, but with dignity. If you've made it this far in this reflection, it's because something in these ideas resonates with your own experience. Maybe you're someone who frequently feels disconnected from the emotional rhythms expected by society. Maybe you've already questioned whether there's something wrong with you for not being able to easily access the happiness that seems so available to others. If you'd like to continue exploring these existential questions, to be part of a community that values deep reflection on what it means to be alive, I gently invite you to subscribe to the channel. Here you won't find promises of guaranteed happiness or magic formulas to solve existence's dilemmas, but you will find honest company to navigate these complex questions that are part of the most authentic human experience. Life isn't a problem to be solved, but an experience to be lived in all its contradictory complexity. Sometimes this means genuinely celebrating. Sometimes it means simply surviving. And both experiences are valid, necessary, profoundly human. When you can accept this, when you can stop judging yourself for not always being in the correct emotional state, you discover a form of peace that doesn't depend on external circumstances. You discover that you can be okay even when you're not okay, that you can find dignity even in difficulty, that you can affirm life's value even when it doesn't make complete sense. Camus reminds us that the deepest revolt against the absurd isn't despair, but the stubborn insistence on continuing to create, love, and live, despite the absence of guarantees. When you survive while others celebrate, you're not failing at life. You're practicing a particular form of existential courage that deserves to be honored, not corrected. And maybe in the end, this capacity to remain present even during the most difficult moments is the most authentic celebration we can offer to the inexplicable mystery of being alive.